Respected professors, dear scholars, and PG students, and faculty from other departments, good morning to you all. I deem it a privilege to extend a warm welcome to you all of today's Endowment Lecture 3 on Gottipati Sindhu, Vimala, Subbarao Garu's memorial lecture, endowment lecture. This is to commemorate the memory of these three persons. At the outset, I invite Professor Vimala Madam to come on to the dais. She is our former rector. Ma'am, please. And she is the president of today's program. Now I welcome Ms. Vaishnav Rai, today's resource person, and she is editor of Frontline News Magazine. Now please come into the. She is going to deliver a lecture on no. She is a role of women in the growth of media. Now I request Professor V. Vimala, Head Department of English, to come on to the details of speech. I once again welcome you all, each and every one of you present here, and I'm sure you will have an enriching experience listening to our resource person. Thank you one and all. Have a nice day. Good morning to everyone, and let us start today's program with the university song. Good morning. The speaker, Ms. Vaishnava, Editor Frontline, The Hindu, author of the Endowment lecture, at the Department of Social Work, faculty of the Department of English, students. I give it a pleasure to be here this morning to preside over the Endowment lectures program. I generally attend all the Endowment lectures of the Department of English for the topics chosen and also for the speakers that are invited. I'm quite attentive, but when Vimala asked me to preside today, looking at the speaker and the topic, I said I should agree so that I will be more attentive and being the president of today's program. So one of the main reasons, one of the three main reasons why I agreed to be here is the speaker herself. Not that I know anything about her, but because she's coming from the field and I love to listen to experience because they are beyond academics and I love to associate with her. Thank you for agreeing to be here and sharing your time with us and our young minds. The second reason is the topic, women in media, women, which is closer to my heart. Also because I'm a woman and I work in a women's university, very interested in women's issues. And thirdly, because it is Department of English, I can never say no to them. Okay. For a second, I think not, maybe for half a minute, I thought whether I'll be a fit person to preside over this function. But then I thought, because it's so interesting, I'll prepare myself. And I looked at some material before I come here. So when I tried to look and learn about the topic on which our esteemed speaker is going to spend the next 1 hour, I found more on the role of women in empowering women, the role of media in empowering women. There's so much written about that. Now which raised a doubt. Aren't women contributing to media in any way? Are we only talking that media is helping women to empower themselves? So there's so much written on media helping women to empower themselves. So I was again delighted seeing that the topic because she'll be talking from the other angle that women are indeed contributing to the growth of media. So Kiran, I think will agree when we talk about media, it is collective communication of outlets wherein we try to use a set of tools to share information. So I found that when we talk about role of media, ma'am correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not an expert on this. It revolves around 4 areas, 4 axes of media where they're talking about media freedom, media pluralism, media independence and media safety. So what attracted me to spend a few minutes on was the media safety, particularly when we are looking at from a. And the other area that I have found also very interesting is the underrepresentation of women in media, which is quite shocking. I mean, I didn't think it was as low as I found in the. Some of the important facts are that all media personnel face difficulties indeed, but because of the additionality of the gender inequalities, safety issues, and the underrepresentation. So when we are talking about underrepresentation, some of the figures that caught my mind were, compared to men, women are much less likely to be included in the media globally, not only in India, which is quite surprising. And again, the areas where they represent are also very stereotyped. I think they are not allowed or they don't move because of various reasons into areas which are very challenging. So a survey indicated that only 19% of the news experts are women and 37% reporters worldwide are women, which is quite a small number, taking into consideration the development that is taking place in all sectors. So the gender imbalance perspective, which we are now looking at, does have a potential to promote and perpetuate the gender stereotypes, and this needs to change a lot. But the question I think before this is, who does this? Who will come forward to do it? And I hope our speaker today will throw some light on that in terms of the changes that need to take place and who exactly has a role and what type of role they have in this aspect. Just a few seconds, few minutes on the media safety. Conceptualizing it, I think it refers to the ability to receive, produce and share information without feeling physical and moral threats. So many of the threats against women, like in many other situations, are not reported. And this, I think, is due to the powerful cultural and professional stigmas that all of us face. Now, does this mean that there is safety? The research and the reports say that it is not safe. Because a global survey of nearly 1,000 journalists, women journalists, which was conducted jointly by the International News Safety Institute, International Women's Media Foundation and UNESCO. They found that 2/3 of women who took part in the survey experienced intimidation, threat or abuse in their workplace. But this didn't come out. So the so-called double onslaught on female journalists is clearly visible. They are targeted both for their gender and their profession as journalists. It is therefore crucial to focus on the gendered components of the dangers to which female journalists are exposed. The harassment women journalists face threatens their right to freedom of expression and limits the diversity of opinion in the media. Given the context, tackling the underrepresentation of women in media, I think, also gains significance. However, the little literature that is available does indicate that against all these odds, women have indeed contributed to the progress of media within the country. The role of women by media has increased. There is an increase in the image of women in the mass media, an increase in the participation of women in the media itself. However, there is a lot more to be done. So I look forward to hearing to today's speaker, who would probably focus on the role of women so far towards the progress of media, throw light on what still needs to be done and by. Thank you to the Department of English for giving me this opportunity. I now call upon Professor Haripadmarani to introduce the donor and her family.
Respected Chairperson, Professor Uma, distinguished speaker of today's lecture, Vaishna Roy, Dr. Nirmala, Head of the Department, Professor Durga Bhavani Madam, who has just arrived. She is the former Vice Chancellor and a professor in the Department of Communication and Journalism. I also welcome Dr. Tripura Sundari, Director ISPAC and also a professor in the Department of Communication and Journalism. And then, I also welcome Professor Shobha to this from the same Department of Communication and Journalism. Of course, Professor Kiran Prasad has been there from the beginning, so it doesn't require a special mention. I welcome all others who have joined, after the welcome address was made. Before I introduce the endower and the persons in whose memory she has instituted this endowment, I just want to tell you how happy I am today. I am happy because it's a very special day. Special day not because it's Saturday, for all Tirupatites Saturday is a special day, not just for that reason. It's a special day because we have no less a person than Vaishna Roy giving this endowment lecture. Please mark the word, no less a person. I say this specifically because as far as I know, she is the first woman in India to head a political news magazine in English. So you can just imagine how remarkable an achievement that is. And we have her here to speak about role of women in the growth of media today. So I have actually an apology to make. I have a confession to make. I owe her an apology. All of you know about the Hindu Lit Fest. Okay, this is a very prestigious event for all literature fans like us. We are all outsiders, but she is an inside a member of the Hindu group, and for her how important this event is you can imagine. The event happens to take place yesterday and today, and I deprived her of attending that event today or being part of that event today, and I feel terribly guilty about that. I felt this public apology might appease my conscience more than doing anything else. So I tender my sincere apologies to you for that, Vaishna. Actually, I also need to mention my classmate Brunda Vasudevan's name here. It's through her that Vaishna is here today. So I thank her. She was to be here, but because of some health issue, she couldn't come. Thank you, Brunda, and thank you, Vaishna, once again. Now coming to the introduction to our endower, Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi. Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi did her Bachelor of Arts in English and Master of Arts in English from Osmania University. Then she did her postgraduate certificate course in teaching of English, which is abbreviated as PGCTE, from the Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages. She obtained her doctoral degree from the Department of English, Sri Padmavati Mahila University in 2009. That's how she becomes our alumna. She also received a postdoctoral research fellowship from the UGC between 2014 and 2019, which she conducted at P.D. Siddhartha College of Arts and Science, Vijayawada. She is a certified soft skills consultant in Campus Connect team in Infosys, also a certified trainer by the US State Department. She participated in 24/7 customer care train the trainer program. She served as lecturer in English at Siddhartha Mahila Kalasala Vijayawada between 1999 and 2000. Later she worked as lecturer in communication skills and soft skills at PG Center, PP Siddhartha College Vijayawada between 2005 and 6. Then she worked as soft skills consultant at Institute for Electronic Governance, IEG, Jawahar Knowledge Centers, JKC Hyderabad between 2004 and 7. She single-handedly and successfully carried out the female student campus placement mission in 32 JKCs by achieving excellent results in the first ever female placement program in the combined state of Andhra Pradesh. Later she worked as associate professor at KL University and then as soft skills consultant and counselor at PT Siddhartha College, Vijayawada between 2014 and 19. And then she published a book and 14 scholarly papers in national and international journals. She worked on the topic, the theme of female suffering in Indian short fiction and English translation. She published this book also besides the other publication. She conducted several awareness programs related to government schemes meant for the education and empowerment of women. She created slogans like Vanito Rakshati Rakshitaha along with Beti Bachao, Beti Padao, Beti Khilao, relating them to the real life stories of women like Geeta Phogat, Arunima Sinha, Deepa Karmatkar and T.V. Sindhu. She conducted many awareness programs related to women's security and safety as well. This is Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi in brief. And now coming to the introductions to the members in whose memory she has instituted this endowment. Sindhu. Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi's bright and charming son was an intelligent and mature boy who sadly and unfortunately died young at the age of 16 in 1999 of an undiagnosed health condition. Though he is no longer around, he lives permanently in the hearts of all those who loved him dearly. And so Gottipati Vimala, Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi's mother, was a homemaker and she was known for her exceptional culinary skills. She made sure that everything she cooked was as nutritive as it was tasty. She was a loving and caring sister, wife, mother and a grandmother. Gottipati Venkata Subbarao, born in the year 1938, served in the irrigation department for several decades till his retirement in 1996. So committed he was to his job and so amiable a person he was that it was hard to forget him for the people of the villages where he worked during his service. Known for his simplicity, he always wore only khadi throughout his life. He was an epitome of self-discipline and concern for others. His concern extended not only to humans, but equally to animals, plants, and to the resources of the planet as well. Unlike most of us today, he lived in such a way that he consumed less than what he could produce. Slogans like save water, save energy, don't waste time, they were all default practices at home. His day would start at 4 a.m. and he was the engineer, gardener, electrician, plumber and carpenter of the house. The entire house except the kitchen was his workshop. In a nutshell, Gottipati Subbarao was a caring, committed and hard-working person from whom his only daughter has fortunately inherited the trait of giving back with gratitude to those who make our lives better, and the proof of it lies in the present endowment she has given to the department. As the proud daughter of Gottipati Vimala and Subbarao, Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi lives in Bangalore, where her daughter Sri Krishna Hasa and son-in-law Harsha live, and much to our pleasure, she is with us today for the lecture. May I request Dr. G. Vijay Lakshmi to stand up once so that the audience will take a listen. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Harpadma. Now Professor Nirmala will be introducing our speaker.
Good morning to all. I once again extend a hearty welcome to this endowment lecture. I am extremely happy to introduce today's speaker, a very lively and multi-talented Vaishnava. She has spent more than 30 years in journalism in full-fledged editorial roles that involve ideation, commissioning of stories, editing and rewriting stories, writing her own articles, as well as laying out and producing publications. She began in 1991 as a young sub-editor in Business Standard, a leading business daily, then published from the city of Kolkata. In that role, she was in charge of 5 weekly features pages, including the paper's prestigious Sunday section. In 1997, she moved to Chennai and joined Business Line, the daily business newspaper from the Hindu group of publications, where she was a senior sub-editor and anchored a daily full page on marketing, media and advertising issues, as well as Catalyst, a weekly 4-page section. In 2000, she joined the Outlook group of publications as features editor. In this role, she was editing 2 sections of Outlook Money magazine as well as writing for Outlook and Outlook Traveler. She was also in charge of special issues and special covers. In 2005, she joined Business Today as associate editor, where she was the editor of a separate 12-page subsection, and she was also the editor of special issues and special covers. After this, Vaishnav took a sabbatical from journalism to explore other areas of work and life. During this time, she took on many interesting assignments such as becoming the communications director for an NGO that works with rural microfinance, in which role she helped to set up the NGO website and to run its communication wing. She was also the editorial advisor for a new lifestyle magazine that was being launched. She created the concept and content guidelines, hired the editor, the editorial and design teams, and trained the editorial staff. Post-sabbatical, Vaishnav rejoined journalism when she was invited by the Hindu daily newspaper to work in their weekend sections. Here, she became the editor of Sunday Magazine, Literary Review, Friday Review, Property Plus, and other segments. And it is interesting to note that she began to write a popular fortnightly column that was a feminist take on society, culture, and politics, which she continued for 8 years. She wrote regularly on art, culture, society, and politics. Her articles included feature pieces, interviews, book reviews, and essays. Vaishnav Rai was selected by the governing board of the Hindu group of publications to become the editor of their prestigious news magazine titled Frontline in May 2022. Vaishnav's interests include reading, writing, travel, humor, gardening, music, art, and cookery, and she speaks 5 languages: English, Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, and French. How nice it would have been if Telugu was also there. I once again welcome you, ma'am. We are really looking forward to hearing you, and hope it would provide much food for the thought, and hope the students will enjoy your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Vimala. The much awaited moment is here now, and I request Ms. Vaishnav Roy to address the gathering and deliver her lecture.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be in this very beautiful and extensive campus that I've had the pleasure of taking a small tour of before I came in. And I loved it, and I'm very envious of you. I would love to be a student again and, just stay here and study here. What an experience that would be. I thank the professors and the management of the Sri Padmavati Mahila Vishwavidyalayam for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here today. I thank the Department of English for their invitation to me to deliver the third Gottipati Sindhu Vimala Subbarao Endowment lecture. I extend special thanks to Professor Hari Padmarani for her efforts in bringing me here. And thank you to Professor Vimala for her very generous introduction, and to Professor Uma for chairing this session. It gives me, particular pleasure to be here today, because I heard that yours is a 40-year-old institution and a women's only institution, and that is it's such an enormous pleasure to be here, because it's this kind of these kinds of initiatives that we need in order to bring our women out of their shells and into the workforce more and more. I also believe that this university is one of its kind in Andhra Pradesh, and that is again something for all of you to be very, very proud of. Thank you to your other professors here for joining us, and to the students. As students of the English department, I believe many of you might be interested in joining the media. Is there anybody here who's sort of looking at joining the media at all? No, alright. I was a student of English myself, and yeah, so I kind of landed up in media. Although there was one time when I thought I was, studying for my IAS exams and cleared the prelims and the mains, but then as fate intervened, journalism course came up. In those days, it was a very rare course, and I fell in love with it from the minute. But I thought that media is such an important aspect of our lives, and media is such an important pillar in democracy, in any functioning democracy, that it makes sense for me to tell you a little bit about the media in India. I believe that no student, regardless of any stream you're from, whether you're from technology or engineering or English or whatever, you have to understand the pillars of democracy, the pillars that make it possible for you to live and study in this in India. So it's vital that you understand media. So before I begin my lecture, I know that all of this is just a tiny bit confusing and just a little bit alien. So I thought it would be nice if I could explain it, sort of put it in context for you. I am, as you were told earlier by Professor Vimala, I am from the Hindu group of publications. The Hindu group is a publishing house, a media publishing house based in Chennai. It's a very, very old group. It goes back to pre-independence days. They started off with a daily newspaper in English called the Hindu, which all of you are familiar with. It's a daily newspaper. But besides that, they have three other publications. They have a daily business newspaper, which is called Business Line, with its own editor and its own magazine, which is called Sports Star. Many of you might be familiar with it. When I was growing up, I used to cut out pictures of Bjorn Borg and corners from Sports Star and put it up on my bedroom walls. So, you, of course, are very young for all of that. Our heroes, the Navratulova and all that. Then, of course, we have Frontline. So, Frontline is a fortnightly news magazine published by the same group. Now, all of these publications have separate editors and separate staff, and each one functions independently, and each one reports to the board directly. So, this is Frontline. I have brought here 2 copies of the latest issue with me. I'm going to leave them here. So please, any one of you who is interested, feel free to browse through it and read through it. There might be stuff that you like, and there might be, it's not necessary for you to read every article, but I'm sure you might find 1 or 2 that appeals to you, appeals to something in your area of interest. And there are a lot of book reviews for English students, and so, the literature students, excellent stuff, I would also urge your professors to please take out a subscription for Frontline in your library, in your university library, because trust me, although I'm saying this myself, very, very rich in content, content that is a pleasure to read. Today, my talk is, yes, about women in media, but it will make no sense really if I don't set the context within which women in media come in. So I need to set the context of the sort of a brief, history in a nutshell of media in India, and then within that I will draw in the idea of women in media and the sort of issues that come up all the time and continue to come up even in 2024. Like I said, media and its role in a democracy is of immense importance to you, all students, and all of you future voting citizens. I'm sure most of you, as English literature students, are familiar with the famous 7 Ages of Man speech from Shakespeare. All of you know about it, right? Good. So as you know, as you like it, Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. And one man in his time plays many parts, his act being 7 ages. Then the poet goes on to describe the 7 ages of man, from infancy to schoolboy to young man to lover, and so on and so forth. So today, indulge me while I indulge in a whim of mine, where I like to sort of trace the path of the growth of media in India as the 7 ages of the media, right? So it's a process, it's a journey through which media has emerged and still continues to emerge. Over the last 75 years, there have been broadly 4 propelling forces
that molded the evolution of media in India. These were first the freedom struggle, of course, then the nation building efforts after independence, then there was the globalization of the 1990s, and then there was the advent and boom of digital technology, especially social media in the early 2000s. And all of these created distinct eras or ages into which media can sort of fall in. First, of course, we start with its infancy, which is the pre-1947 era, forged in the crucible of the freedom movement. Those were very, very heady days. The air was pulsing with energy, with indignation, with fierce nationalism. There was an urge to serve, to do one's duty, and to do whatever tiny thing you could towards the cause of freedom. The whole nation was buzzing with idealism and with idealistic young men and women who were willing, very often literally, to lay their lives down for the cause. Are you familiar with Wordsworth's ode in which he speaks of the French Revolution and he says, "Bliss was it that dawned to be alive, but to be young was very heavy." Very evocative word. In those days, in that era, journalism was very much infected by that same sense of idealism, that same sense of purpose and drive. It did not play a minor role in creating that sense of josh or enthusiasm among its citizens. The media was suffused with ideas of autonomy, resistance to power, ideas of truth-telling, ideas of fighting for justice, for freedom, for free speech. Media in those days would not pander to populism, would not pander to jingoism. It fought to keep communism at bay. It fought to create the idea of a single unified India, which would throw off the yoke of the British and march into a glorious future. In those days, journalism, in fact, was so closely connected to the freedom movement that often freedom fighter and journalist were the same, one and same person. Gandhi, for instance, as you are well aware, was a journalist as well as a freedom fighter. He was an editor of note. He edited Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who ran Kesari. There was G. Subramanian Ghosh, who ran the historical Amrita Bazar Patrika in Bengal. There was K. Ramakrishna Pillai, who ran the Swadeshi Bhumi or Patriot in Malayalam. Madan Mohan Malviya, Motilal Nehru started the leader, etc., etc. The list of names is quite long. But you will notice that there are no names of women in this list. Why was that? Because there were no women editors at that time. But in fact, women were already, even before independence, making their presence felt in Indian media in a small but mostly unrecognized way. They were always kept in the background. There was Hemant Kumari Devi, who began to publish Sugribani in Hindi from Allahabad. This was in 1888. Then there was Hari Devi. She launched Bharati Bhagini, also in Hindi, in 1889. Most of the women in media at this time, in the pre-independence days, which is often referred to as the first wave of women in media in India, they were related to progressive men or to freedom fighters. And they would sort of write about women's education, women's issues, about politics, health and books. They would be taking up the struggle, for instance, against regressive practices like sati and so on, and write articles about these issues. But they would also be focused on pure women's issues like housekeeping or recipes or sewing or whatever. The ones who worked on pure news were often very serious journalists, but they were working with either fathers or husbands. And they were, like I said, largely anonymous. Nevertheless, the air of hope and determination that suffused the Indian atmosphere at that time allowed women into what were hitherto forbidden areas. Public space women didn't get in, but you are as aware as I am that the Indian freedom movement created an extraordinary moment in history when Indian women, despite their very conservative backgrounds and despite very fairly oppressive domestic situations, were able to come right up to the forefront of the freedom movement and in many ways do things counterparts in the West could get access to only much later. So that was a very startling sort of, inflection point for women in India. At this time, Calcutta was the capital of British India, and a lot of these voices in media, both male and female, came from Bengal. There were, of course, English missionaries who were also sort of devoted to the cause of the media in India. But one thing we should be careful to note is that there are some names. You've got William Carey, you've got Joshua Marshman and William Ward. They were popularly known. They brought out Samachar Darpan and Friends of India from Bengal. They were fighting against social injustice, but they were not necessarily fighting for an independent India. That's important to note over here. That took our own Indian voices to put that fight forward. So the voice of these British men and British missionaries who were prominent in media at the time was usually a voice raised for social justice. And at this point of time, there was a rising tide of newspapers, not only in Bengal, but across the country. There was in Hindi, Tamil, Marathi, Gujarati, everywhere newspapers had started to come out, most often dedicated to the cause of the freedom movement. Interestingly, one thing that you should know is that pre-independence, pre-1947, the impulse to shut down newspapers and to shut up media voices because of what they say and because of what they publish existed very much in the domain even then. When the Tribune covered the 1919 Jallianwala Bagh massacre, the paper was shut down and its editor Kalinath Ray was sent to jail. The British, in fact, were particularly repressive of the press. They passed the Vernacular Press Act of 1878, which basically banned any local language media that criticized British policies. But the ban excluded English language media because there were Britishers also producing English language newspapers. So there were many other acts that the British passed to repress the media, but I'm particularly referring to this one because of an interesting twist. Amrita Bazar Patrika at this time was a Bengali language newspaper. It was being published from Kolkata. It was a strident critic of the Raj. So as soon as the Vernacular Press Act of 1878 was passed, the paper would have been shut down inevitably. So they shifted to English, right? They became an English daily. So they escaped, and they became therefore the oldest Indian-owned English daily. And they were so fierce in their criticism. Apparently, even Lenin at one point actually pinpointed this particular publication under the Bazar Patrika and said that this is possibly one of the most strident voices in media today. When I began my career in journalism, as mentioned, I was in Business Standard in Kolkata. That was a part of the Anandabazar Patrika group. And Anandabazar Patrika was very much our neighbors. Many of my colleagues were then working in Anandabazar Patrika, which was then still alive and kicking. But finally, in 1991, the paper died. Sad. At any rate, before 1947, the Raj was attacking the media with ferocity. The Newspapers Act, the Criminal Law Amendment Act, Press Act, blah blah, all passed before independence. What I'm trying to say is that we don't have to look very far, for the inspiration behind our own modern day government's penchant for press censorship. The inspiration was very much there. We now come to Gandhi. Gandhi was not just a spoke in the wheels as an activist and a political activist who came up with increasingly novel and sort of unopposable ways to resist the Raj, but he was, as I mentioned earlier, an editor of note, and he made a complete nuisance of himself as a journalist. He was part of about a half a dozen newspapers. Of these, he edited 4. Indian Opinion was his first. It was started in South Africa. You do know about his activism in South Africa before he came to India. Then there was Young India, there was Navjivan, there was Harijan, all started in India. And Gandhi's motto for journalism was that the sole aim of journalism is service. I don't know how many of the present day journalists will recognize this sentence anymore. Another great editor of those times is Potan Joseph, also the first editor of Dawn in Undivided India in 1942. Now Dawn, many of you might recognize the name, is a newspaper which is published out of Pakistan, Islamabad. Potan Joseph famously said that his motto for journalism was courage, vigilance and fidelity. Now these three qualities are inseparable from any journalist's work ethics: courage, vigilance, fidelity. If you have heard of the famous cartoonist Shankar, has any one of you heard of Shankar? Yeah.
Vaishnav, students of journalism are also.
So they will know all of the things, many of the references I make. That's wonderful.
And incidentally, Fortnite is already subscribed in the library.
Thank you. Wonderful to know. Wonderful to know. So Shankar, this great editorial cartoonist, he was discovered by Potan Joseph. It is to Shankar that Nehru once famously said, "Don't spare me, Shankar," he said. Now this brings us to the second, what I call the second sort of age in journalism. This is the post-independence phase. Now we are in a slightly more complicated area. This is becoming slightly more grey. It's less black and white. Idealism is still there. Idealism is still high, but we are also getting more practical. We are getting more, tinged by the colors of everyday living. There is also a hint of cynicism entering media at this stage. But we are still in the area of nation building, right? And media had committed itself to the task of nation building. Writers, artists, intellectuals, we all jumped into the fray at this point of time. We were very, very actively involved in writing. 1930 is an important date for us to know, because this is when Illustrated Weekly hired Homai Vairawala in Bombay. She was the very first woman to be hired as a professional journalist in the staff of any newspaper. But what was even more important was that she was a news photographer. Women news photographers continue to be a very rare breed in India, even today. So for her to be doing this at that time was phenomenal indeed. And she is she's actually a kind of cult figure for journalists. In 1949, there's another landmark which you might want to know, which was the Economic Weekly, which later became EPW, which is a very, very important landmark in the history of intellectual journalism in independent India. The next major event would take place in 1951. The Constitution Bill amended Article 1962 to include 3 new restrictions on the right to free speech. Very, very important. This was the very first amendment to the Constitution. This was happening when Nehru was there. This is happening when, idealism and all of it is really at a high. But this is what I meant when I said that the first temperings of cynicism are entering. We get a restriction on the right to free speech. And the 3 restrictions are public order, friendly relations with foreign states, and any incitement to an offence. We will come back to that later. At this time, English language media was still holding sway. There were 2 reasons for this, why English continued to hold sway. Because, I'm not sure, I think the journalism students might know, but for the rest of you, news agencies are consolidated agencies which gather news from across the world, and newspapers subscribe to them. So very often, there is a daily stream of news coming to you. As an editor, I'll be getting a daily stream when I subscribe to PTI or whatever, and that will come to me. Now they used to use the Roman alphabet, and so their feed, it was easier to send the feed by English language. So the vernacular language newspapers used to be at a disadvantage. That's one reason why English language continued to dominate at that time. And the other reason was, of course, the spending public was the English-speaking urban public. So advertisers were more willing to place their ads in English language press. This has changed enormously now. Now it's very, very different. English language publications reach only about 25-30% of the population. The rest is an enormous sort of regional language press that is working today all across the country. In 1959, a huge landmark happened in the media space. And anybody want to take a guess? Any journalism student in 1959, what happened? Doordarshan came. Doordarshan sort of changed the idea of how we would consume news, right? But the actual ways in which TV would impact us as consumers of news and consumers of other kinds of programming would come later. But right now, let's stick to Doordarshan. Another important thing happened with the arrival of Doordarshan. By the 1960s, we got the first women anchors. They were the news anchors who would come onto our Doordarshan TV screens. This, in many ways, was a significant move for women into the visible space of journalism, into the visible space of media in India. These are women who were household names for my generation. Salma Sultan, Geetanjali Iyer, Neeti Ravindran, Rini Simon. They were there on our TV screens every day. They were news readers, they were presenters of programs. Very often they would double up as the presenters and anchors during Republic Day events and so on. But for the first time, women were recognized faces, women had an identity of their own in media, and they were also pushing media very, very gently. I am not going to claim that they had any great power, but they were able to certainly influence gently the kinds of news that would be covered, which actually is one of the leading or the most important fallout that one hopes for when women enter media in large numbers, right? We will talk about that in a bit. This is also the time of the celebrity female hosts like Tabassum, who anchored a very famous cinema program on TV on Hindi, and this was also true of regional language Doordarshan programming. They would conduct interviews, for instance, on cultural programs. They would interview singers. So women were slowly emerging into the news space. But they were still largely in soft news. Soft news is news which is not politics, which is not actual on-ground reporting, not economic reporting. They were still in cinema, they were still in music, etc., etc. This is also the time, the 50s, this is an important decade for you. This is also the time when you get magazines like Filmfare, you get magazines like Femina, you get magazines in Star and Style, etc. All of these magazines, again, hire women in large numbers. Again, soft features magazines hire women in large number. By the 50s, the Indian feminist movement was in its fledgling stage. So several women who entered media at this stage were also very, very driven and very idealistic, and they were slowly beginning to make a mark. They were entering the newsroom in small ways. So although the large number of women were entering media via cinema and women's magazines like Femina, etc., a very tiny number, ones and twos and dribbles and drabs, were also entering the newsroom under male news editors and male editors. In Telugu journalism, you might be interested, the K. Ramalakshmi at this time, or would it be Ramalakshmi? Ramalakshmi became the first woman journalist when she joined the Telugu daily Swatantra in this decade. Now we come to the third phase of Indian media, and this is a very, very dark phase of the history. On the morning of June 26, 1975, readers in New Delhi did not get any newspapers. Everybody was wondering what had happened, why the newspapers hadn't landed on their doorstep as it would every morning. What they did not know was that the previous night, all the leaders of the opposition parties had been arrested. Newspaper publications had been suspended, and Indira Gandhi had declared the emergency. In many ways, this is seen of the dark days when governments could shut down the free press by any means that they wanted. By July that year, newspapers were allowed only if they followed pre-publication censorship guidelines. In other words, you had to clear what you were going to publish in exit by a government agent, and only then you would be allowed to publish it. Many newspapers tried to protect this practice by leaving blank spaces in the all-important editorial section of the newspaper. If you're not aware of what an editorial section of the newspaper is, invariably the center spread of the newspaper, a center spread, will have two pages. This is known as the leader page. This is known as the op page, editorial and opposite editorial. Although op-ed these days is also construed as opinion, it originally was the opposite editorial page. In this editorial page of a newspaper, there is a thin column over here on the extreme right, which is where the editorials are written. Editorials are typically unauthored. They won't carry a byline. They are the voice of the newspaper. This is where the newspaper tells you what is my policy, what is my stand on this, what is my stand on emergency, what is my stand on the new budget that has been passed this year, what is my stand on such an XYZ policy or constitutional amendment, whatever it is, the new election results, etc. So, section. And when the government said that all content has to be clear, many papers, editors took a stand by leaving a protest by leaving the space blank, right? Or they would black it out. Government stopped that also. They said even that mark of protest will be forbidden, will be banned from now on. Soon publications began to be categorized in this area, in this time, as friendly, neutral or hostile publications. Friendly, neutral, hostile publications. Can you imagine? They were classified. And they were suitably rewarded or published depending on which category they fell into. International news outlets were banned at this time. Many foreign correspondents were expelled. Accreditation to unfriendly reporters were cancelled. So if you had ever been critical of Indira Gandhi or her son or her regime, your accreditation, reporters need accreditation. You need card. You need an accreditation card in order for you, for example, to enter parliament and to report on parliament proceedings, right? So those cards, without that card you can't enter parliament. You can't enter, for instance, Prime Minister's press conference. So those that accreditation was cancelled for journalists who were considered hostile to the regime. This, I don't have to tell you, is eerily similar to what is happening today when interviews are either granted only to hand-picked sympathizers of the regime, or very comfortably the interview with the Prime Minister is granted to a film star who can then ask him how he eats a mango, and then that becomes news. How many of you have heard of Khushwant Singh? You've heard of Khushwant Singh. I want to share an interesting fact with you. Khushwant Singh, as you know, most of us admire him. We think of him as, really a strong voice, and then he used to write these really strong columns, right? And one of his columns, if you remember, used to be called "With Malice Towards One and All." It was called. Khushwant Singh was a strong supporter of the emergency, and he wrote a column supporting it and explaining exactly why he was supporting it. Unbelievable. Many brave men and women at this time, many brave journalists continued to work in secret. They would distribute pamphlets in secret. They would print out little newspapers in cyclo style, these little things, in secret presses in their homes, and those would be distributed before dawn in order to keep citizens apprised of who had been arrested, who had been released, what was going on under the emergency. So that was also continuing, and in this group of very brave journalists were a lot of women as well. Cut their teeth at that time and went on later to make a mark in journalism. The censorship of the press lasted until the emergency was lifted. Emergency is lifted, and what happens now? We enter the fourth stage, what I would like to think of as when Shakespeare describes the life of a man as the first flush of youth for Indian media, which is sort of, crawled and stumbled and come up to the stage. First flush of Indian youth after emergency, astonishing efflorescence, The media just blossomed. It was as if it had got an overnight shower of rain and it was all sort of coming into bloom. There was sunshine, there was air, there was hope. Media houses mushroomed in the 70s and 80s. In 1975, we had India Today. 76, we had Sunday, publisher of Calcutta. In Midday, we had 1979, we had Midday, which was one of the very first tabloid newspapers. We had the Telegraph in 1982, still going strong. Illustrated Weekly, much earlier publication, was continuing to go strong now. Malayalam Manorama Group launched The Week in 1982. There was the whole set of non-news publications. There was Stardust, Society Savvy, Women's Era. Then there were what we call the niche publication, which was Inside Outside, which was an architecture, interiors kind of a public design. We had Business India. We had Sports Star from the Hindu group, etc., etc. All of this was happening. The media, it seemed, was kind of making up for this loss of visibility in the emergency by coming out really strongly now. It was a bubbling, frothing media scene, and the maximum number of women joined media during this year, and this is now the final sort of what we like to think of as a second wave. Women were in media in a big way. You had editors for the first time, although they were still editors of lifestyle magazines. You had Vimala for Femina. You had Srini Talyar for Trend. She also edited Flair. You had Gulshan Event for Eve's Weekly. Because before these women became editors of Femina and Eve's Weekly, the proprietors would have male editors with women reporting to them, even for women's publications. So the fact that women finally allowed to at least take the reins of women's publications itself is like a big stepping stone for us. But this is also the time when, what I told you, they were sort of getting prepared for this moment. Women started to enter mainstream news publications in a big way. Statesman in Delhi had 2 women in the newsroom at this time. You had Ela Sen, she became the very first female foreign correspondent for Hindustan Times. You had the Indian Express, Hindu, National Herald, all had 1 or 2 women in the newsroom. Now this is, imagine this, but for instance, the Hindu's proprietors refused to allow women in the newsroom reporters have to work in shifts, okay? Because a newspaper is a daily which reaches your doorstep by 6:30 in the morning. So the paper goes to press at 1 o'clock at night. So there are people working in shifts. And all newspaper magazines are divided into 2 streams. You have what is called the desk. What you mean loosely by the word desk is the people who edit copy, clean up the copy, etc. The copy means any story is copy. You have the reporters, right? Reporters go to the field, they do an interview, they might do an interview with Professor Uma for instance, and they will come to their office and type it out and send it off to the editor. The editor will take that copy and give it to who are called the desk people. Desk people are the behind the scenes magicians. They will take the copy, they will clean it up, they will give it a headline, they will fact check it. Every fact will be cross checked, right? All that clean up job has to happen. Then the desk will work very closely with the design team in order to lay it out for you to see the magazine or the newspaper the way you see it now, right? So that's the desk and that's the reporting section. Both of them have to obviously work very, very late hours in a newspaper, right? So the desk itself has to be cleaning copy right up to the last copy is filed at 1 o'clock in the morning and the paper is finally put to bed. Reporters similarly are very often reporting fairly late in the day. Newspapers at this time would not take women in the late shifts because they'd say, we don't want to be responsible for your safety. How will you go home? What will happen to you? There wouldn't be toilets in newspaper offices for women. So what do they do when they have a long stint in there? So it was an extremely unfriendly sort of atmosphere. And all your colleagues were men. And when you went out in the field, everybody was a man. The hardships in the field were fairly strong at that time. What transportation did you use, etc., etc. So for women to enter in dribbles 1, 2, 3, 4 in the newsroom was a fight, and it happened, and it continued to happen. The 80s are the time of the star women reporters in hard news. You have Anita Pratap, you have Seema Mustafa, you have Radhika Ramasheshan, Tavleen Singh, Neerja Chaudhary. I met Neerja Chaudhary at the Lit Fest just yesterday. A brilliant new book she's written because she's been reporting about prime ministers from, the times of before Indira Gandhi, time of Indira Gandhi. So she's written this brilliant book on Prime Minister, fantastic, I met her yesterday. She was there, she made her mark at that time. There was Kalpana Sharma, feminist, Jyoti Punwani, feminist, reporter. Jyoti Punwani continues to report, astonishing. But very often they were still the only women journalists in their city. It was not as if, there were like dozens. And in your office, you continued to be two women in the office and so on. In the mid-1970s, for instance, Kalyani Shankar says that she was the only woman journalist in all of Hyderabad. Okay. And in Bombay too, this is true. And that's the strange thing, right? Bombay, very progressive, etc. But this was still true. Olga Tellis, at that time, was the only female reporter in 1964. This extraordinary journalistic efflorescence of the 1980s was seen across languages and across regions, Bengali, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, Gujarati, and there were many women now coming into regional media as well. And women in regional media has always been a much more difficult proposition than it has been for women in urban centers in English media. Then something happens in the 1990s. Does anybody want to tell me what happens in 1990-91 that completely changes the scene of media? Liberalization happens in 1991, and we enter a completely different age. This is the fifth age of the media, and one of the very first notable things that would impact media intimately was satellite television. Satellite television, I mean, of course the 80s had Doordarshan, but satellite television completely changed how media would interact with people on a day-to-day basis. The intimacy was something completely different. It was like a storm on the media landscape. There were antennas on every terrace, dish antennas on every terrace. Cable TV wires were crisscrossing overhead. There was Star, there was Z, Sony, ETV, Sun, BBC, CNN, MTV. Doordarshan did not stand a chance. So that is also the beginning of the eclipse of Doordarshan. Finance was now pouring into media in a big way. Media companies were beginning to be listed on the stock exchange. Media, in other words, at this time had become an industry. So the change is happening now. Do you remember when I quoted you earlier and they said media is a calling, media is a commitment? Now media is an industry. And what happens next when media becomes an industry? What happens next? So much capital being poured into media. You can guess what happened. Capital always wants returns. Capital will always demand a return. That's exactly what happened. Profits were getting profits became of primary importance. The focus of media, please take advertiser. So what media will now produce is not geared towards what the reader wants. It's now geared to what the advertiser imagines the reader wants. Do you understand? This is a very, very crucial change in the media atmosphere. So if the advertiser thought that his consumer of biscuits or buckets or cornflakes or whatever was X market segment or Y market segment, he could now put pressure through the medium of advertising revenue to insist that media houses gear their writing towards such and such a consumer segment. This is the beginning of what I'd like to call the dumbing down of media. Complete dumbing down of media happens once the advertisers take over media houses. This is the decade which also sees, obviously, the commoditization and consumerization of media to an extent when media and entertainment become interchangeable terms. This is very important. Media and entertainment are now being used as one and the same word and one and the same breath. Newspapers and TV channels are no longer seen as vehicles of news, they are seen as vehicles of entertainment, they are seen as vehicles of ad revenues. Ads or sponsorships, don't get me wrong, advertisement has always been a part of the Indian media landscape. Pre-independence also you had advertisement. In fact, in those days, page 1 of a newspaper would be full of ads. And in between somewhere tiny bits of news would be there. So there is nothing wrong in getting, newspapers have to survive. It's an expensive business. They need finance. So yes, there's nothing wrong in news. I'm not burying my head in the sand and imagining life without advertising revenue. But what is the crucial difference? That earlier there was an invisible line between what you like to think of as the commercial side, which is the getting of advertising revenue, and the editorial side of media publishers. So it was an invisible line, and seldom was that line crossed. But now, and editors invariably were given a free hand by their publishers. Publishers are the owners of media houses. So the owners of media houses obviously are worried about the financial survival of their companies. Editors are invariably salaried people. We are paid salaries, right? But there was a time when editors were given a free hand. Publishers did not said, we are ensuring the survival, financial survival of the newspaper, of the magazine, etc., etc. It's your job to content and publish the content that you feel is required for the country, right? And that kind of editorial freedom was astonishing. Editor's word was law. No one crossed the editor's word. They could have showdowns. Publisher editor fights were legion. They could fight, but the editor was allowed to fight, and very often the editor was allowed to carry the day. That line was wiped out. That line was wiped out when media became a commodity. And when that line gets wiped out and that line gets breached, that's what I mean when I say that media now no longer is a vehicle of news alone, right? However, when it comes to women, this is also the time when women enter the media workspace in very large numbers, right? Now, media is an accepted profession. Media schools have come up in their dozens across the country. They're churning out. Female students are very much, in fact, very often in the majority over there, and they join the workplace. They join both behind the scenes when it comes to the desk work, but they also join television reportage. They become newscasters. They are doing all the things that men thought they could not do. They're taking those mics. They're going out into the villages and towns to report. They're staying up late. They're filing their news reports at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night, and nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. People are surprised to see with what ease women are taking to the media profession. However, at the same time, I have to also say, this is true of both men and women journalists, very few really stand up to the crass commercialization of media at this time. For the most part, women journalists are as complicit in the media as entertainment construct as anybody else, as their male counterparts, right? But another thing is also important at this stage. Men continue to outnumber women in the leadership positions, right? Women as editors continue to be very, very rare. And the astonishing thing is, when I come to 2024, I'm going to tell you the same thing. That men continue to outnumber women in leadership positions in media. But at this point, we enter the sixth stage, which is the 2000s. And my goodness, what an age. This is your age. Rapid growth in mobile telephony, rapid growth in digital media, absolute transformation in life as we knew it. It has upended everything we thought we knew about education, communication, entertainment, everything. The internet, please note, the internet could not really bridge the rich-poor city, village, urban, rural gap. It could not really bridge it, although very many people thought that the internet would bridge it. It could not, because internet continued to be unaffordable and inaccessible. However, what happened was that the mobile phone came in, and the mobile phone bridged that gap. Everybody soon had a mobile phone in their hands, and the world now was at everybody's doorstep. Whether you were in a village, whether you were in a city, the world was at your doorstep. This single factor emancipated women to an enormous degree, emancipated women across professions to an enormous degree. But what also happens at this time? and the messaging, which as I already told you is a hugely commercial messaging coming through. What is happening is that the imaging and the messaging that is coming through is very often disseminating the same patriarchal. Now, what is even more tragic is that these stereotypical, these sort of patriarchal messages are clothed in very, very glamorous, attractive, Instagram ready, costumes. And what happens is young women buy into those same stereotypes without questioning, right? They imagine that they are free, they imagine that they are emancipated. What they don't realize is they're falling back into the same patriarchal structures, only now it looks very, very attractive, it looks very, very quote unquote modern. This begins a unique challenge for India. We begin to see technological inclusion to an unprecedented degree, yes. But what we do is we make the mistake of imagining that this is also social inclusion and economic inclusion, but it is not. It is not. It is not gender inclusion either. And India's unequal society, even in the 2000s, continues to be deeply, deeply unequal. Into this sort of chaotic environment, into this chaotic milieu, what happens is social media comes in. Social media has enormous reach, it has got an access which is really intimate, it's one-to-one, it is very, very seductive in its appeal. I don't know how many of you know of the phrase WhatsApp University. This is when everybody begins to abandon the idea of reading, abandon the idea of books, and they imagine that they're going to get all their inspiration from WhatsApp forwards, which are often completely fake. It makes possible communication of one-to-many, as well as many-to-one, as well as many-to-many. It's important. In the first 5 years of the 2000s, we see the earliest political parties, the earliest politicians, the earliest celebrities, film stars, they start to have social media handles. Why is this important? Why do I mention this here in this lecture today? Because when political parties, when politicians, when ministers establish social media handles, they begin to communicate with their electorate, with their people, with their communities on one-on-one. And in many ways they imagine that therefore they can eliminate the media. It used to be the go-between. The media would interview the chief minister and the chief would ask him questions, for instance, or her questions, and those questions would be relayed to readers, relayed to voters via the medium of newspapers, magazines, television channels and so on. That gets eliminated, right? Now they're talking to you via social media messages on WhatsApp. Or there is somebody sitting in a town in Patna and he says, I'm also a journalist, I'm going to send you the latest news about a road accident that happened in my city. I'm going to send it on WhatsApp. The chief minister says, I'm going to talk to my guys on social media, on Twitter, etc. Everybody imagines that this is a great step forward, that this is a great democratization of media, that everybody is a journalist, media is for everybody, it doesn't have to be an elitist closed-room profession. But there is a danger here, and the danger is important to spot. And the danger is that the intervention of the journalist, intervention that was not there just for the sake of being an intervention. It was an intervention that filtered fake news from real news, that asked the chief minister difficult questions, that challenged the chief minister with first-hand data. So the reporter was already doing his homework, going through sheets and sheets of data. She was already reading about past performances. She had already gone to some village and done her footwork there. And then she was basing her questions to the minister on those things. So it was not a one-way communication. Today, the chief minister is saying, I inaugurated something, blah, blah. I have opened up a college and so many kids can come there. And you are accepting that at its face value. There's no pushback. So the democratization, the so-called democratization of media has come at a great price. There is no more, there is nothing to tell us whether that a person reporting a gruesome death on a street in Patna is actually telling you the truth. There's nothing to tell you that. So this idea, while very, very noble, the idea of the citizen journalists, and many of them are indeed sincere in what they do, it becomes an unfiltered effort which can often have a very bad backlash. Pamela Philippos, the famous journalist, writes a book, and in her book she speaks of two major events, what she calls mediatized events, and she says that those two events kind of launched this era of the 2000s. The first was the India Against Corruption campaign 2011. Many of you will know that. That's the BJP into power and pushes the Congress, the second UPA government out of power. Kejriwal rides on the wave of the India Against Corruption campaign. The second was the Delhi gang rape protests. If you remember, Nirbhaya and the Delhi gang rape protests. For the first time, Twitter and SMS campaigns were used in a big way, and there was a new direct, intense, aggressive public engagement with these issues. There was an instant response from the public. And what did the public demand? The public demanded violent vigilante punishment immediately. Again, what do we say? Instant violent vigilante publication. Again, what we see is breakdown in the rule of law, breakdown in the idea of justice being a process of somebody being assumed innocent until proven guilty. You don't just go. What happened in Hyderabad a few years ago was one of the most egregious examples of that, when the police, simply to please the public hankering to punish the perpetrators of that horrible, horrible rape, simply simply shot and killed two men, then they killed four in a so-called encounter death, and later it was established that they were not the culprits at all. But this is what happens. If you are going to now talk to the public directly, the public is going to respond as a mob, and a mob unnatural response. Everything about this new age was instant, everything about this new age was visceral. It was slow, there was no time for reflection, no time for thought, everything had to be like that. This is why at this time we see another very dangerous development. We see social media being weaponized against women, whether they were from the media or whether they were from ordinary walks of life. Social media is weaponized against women in an extraordinary way. There are rape threats. Women are doxxed. You know what doxing is? Doxing is when a woman's personal details, phone number, address and so on is put out in the public domain so that anybody has access to her address, her home address, her telephone number. Women have been doxxed to the extent when they've had to move homes, they've had to change their phone numbers. You have revenge porn popping up at this time. So if you got rid of your boyfriend could post intimate photographs of you on social media in order to target you. Invariably, social media too continues to claim emancipation, but at the same time continues to make women its greatest victims. And this is particularly seen against women journalists. It's also particularly seen against Muslim women journalists, and that is like an awful, awful development. It continues to this day. The early 2000s was also when algorithms were created, and algorithms now would promote only a certain kind of news, and this would be the news that is guaranteed to get the most hits. So you started getting what in our language we call the bait headlines, clickbait headlines. So the clickbait headline is absolute rubbish. It's like a trap, and immediately you see it and you're attracted to it and you click it. 10 ways to get thin before the summer. In one day. Or 5 ways to get a bikini body before the summer hits you. And then immediately you click. And it's rubbish, right? It's just something put together like that. But it gets click. Or what did, I don't know who your famous stars are in your Bahubali maybe, yeah. So what is the Yes, what does Prabhas eat for breakfast? And then everybody click, okay, we need to find out what Prabhas is for. Because those are clicks, okay, those are baits. These baits immediately drag you in and you go down this, rabbit hole of nonsense. But that's what the algorithm does to you. And this has transformed media in an alarming way to a point when one is no longer sure of what journalism is or what it is meant to do. The other day I was told that I am a content producer. But I am not, I am a journalist. What is this content producer? I am a bucket maker or something. I am not, I don't just produce content. We are journalists, we report on the news. But that's what we are being reduced to. We are being reduced to this. It's astonishing. It's funny, but it's so tragic also. Journalism has been produced, like I said, producing content. The famous journalist P. Sainath, who made an enormous mark for himself in rural journalism and village reporting, he said, media is a business, but journalism is a calling. And we have to remember that. Media is a business. And I must tell you at this point that journalists don't get paid very much money, We are among the poorest paid, especially in Chennai. Delhi at least you get some money. Chennai now you don't get money. So journalism not really a highly paid profession, but you have to be prepared for it. You have to be prepared for the fact that you're not, in this for making money, that you're in this because it's a calling of a certain. I come to the last, seventh stage of the Indian media. Shakespeare in his little ode says, this is when man sinks into mere oblivion, saw teeth, saw eyes, saw taste, saw everything. Saw is the French word for without. So without teeth, without eyes, without taste, without everything. And I am saying that that's what media has sunk to today. I don't think I can improve on Shakespeare if I have to comment on the condition of Indian media today. I think this is the most apt thing to say. I am sad and I am grieved to be saying this, but it is a fact. 8 or 9 years, it's been the complete capitulation of media houses to power, both economic power and to political power. To call what is purveyed on our television screens each evening journalism would be to do a violence to that term as we know it. At this stage, the submission of the media to the government in power is so complete that I find it immaterial to distinguish between men and women journalists at this stage. I'm sorry, but they are both equally guilty of complete capitulation, of failing in their duty as journalists. We did not arrive at this juncture by accident. Psychologists and sociologists have studied the rise of fascism in the 1930s and 1940s to see what could have aided the process of complete subjugation that the masses displayed at that time. They found that the extremist political movements of these times extensively used what were then radical new media technologies, which was radio, film, etc. And those new media technologies of that era were used to carry messages to millions and millions of people, whipping up a frenzy, what psychoanalyst Roger Moni Curley calls mass suggestion. Mass suggestion was happening then, in the 30s and the 40s, when fascism was at its peak in Europe. Curley points out to how people have a general tendency to obey authority. And this tendency of people to obey authority can be conditioned into seeing the world in black and white, into seeing the world as victims and perpetrators, and to constantly be able to find somebody to blame all of society's ills on somebody. You could always find a scapegoat, and it was the job of the government in power at that time to enable the citizens of the country to find a scapegoat so that they won't blame the government for the lapse in their life. Mass media at that time could be and was used to amplify such efforts by the parties in power. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, it was on the back of a totally subjugated and fawning media. It hailed his every action. It demonized anything that seemed even slightly critical of Hitler or his policies. For fascism to succeed, ladies, it needs absolute control over all elements of information dissemination. Remember that. Reporters and editors in Germany and Italy at that time were encouraged to believe that their job was to serve the nation. Their job was to serve the nation. And how would they serve the nation? By serving the government in power. So what were you doing? You were equating the government in power with the nation. What you have to remember always is the government in power is completely different from what the nation is. Your patriotism is not determined by how well you serve the government in power. You continue to be an enormous patriot when you continue to serve the nation, when you question the government in power, any government in power of any color, of any political dispensation whatsoever. The total submission of Indian media today to the government's bidding is remarkable. The fact that the leader of a democracy refuses to give an interview to any media publication is something that we have to note with as a great tragedy. However, also remember that trying to suppress media is not the prerogative of any one kind of government. All governments do. All governments will try to subject power. You will recall how Rajiv Gandhi, when he was Prime Minister, he tried to bring in the anti-defamation law. That anti-defamation law would have effectively discouraged all journalists from investigating anything the government did. But what happened was there was a huge public uproar at that time. And faced with that kind of extraordinary public protest across the country, Rajiv Gandhi withdrew the bill, right? That is important. As long as public protests are allowed, as long as those protests can fight back to suppression will always happen. All governments will suppress the media. As long as we are allowed to fight back the suppression, to report that suppression, then you know that the media is still healthy, that the democracy is still healthy. There is another danger today, which is the danger of technology and AI, which means that fake news has become a reality, deep fake videos, media manipulation, all of these things have become commonplace. So that you really have reached a stage now where nobody really knows what the truth is. And it is in very many ways the post-truth world that other people and other speakers and other thinkers have spoken of before. When you can't distinguish between the truth and the untruth. But what is quite fantastic is the speed with which we have reached this stage. And in the post-truth world, when you can't believe what you see, when you can't believe what you hear, the challenge to understand, to distinguish between your media sources becomes that much more difficult for the average citizen, and that much more important for you to understand the context in which I'm setting media for you today, and that much more important for you to understand the stages and what really media is and tries to do. What can you do as students? What can all of us do as citizens? First, do not believe whatever you see or hear without questioning it. Do not allow yourself to be told what to believe. Ask questions, read books, read history. Read history all the time. History is not disseminated through WhatsApp forwards. Find out for yourself. Go back to the original sources at all times. What can women do? For one, women can stand up to the government. One, women can refuse to be co-opted into the structures that they have inherited. There is absolutely no need for us to tread the same old paths. They can be the voices of reason, they can be the voice of integrity, they can be the voices of truth in a world that is almost completely manipulated and controlled by a capitalist patriarchy. The question is, will they? The far easier path is to, be Insta ready and be, selfie ready or whatever. It's so much quicker and so much more fun, right? It's much harder to fight the good fight. But I think as women we have the strength and we can do this, we can take this fight ahead, and I would like for women, my peers in journalism to be able to do this. They have to act independently and they have to understand that they're mere puppets in a capitalistic patriarchal enterprise, and they have to strike out on their own to take decisions that will finally be in the challenges then that we face today. If I were to quickly just encapsulate it, fake information which is tweaked to look like the truth, The rise of hate speech powered by partisan forces, from all sides, embedded corporate and political interests in mass media, which is the death for independent journalism. So, as I started to say, what Shakespeare said about the last stage for man is very much true of media today, and it really does seem to be without any teeth, without any eyes. But do I sound overly pessimistic? I would like to tell you that actually I'm not. I'm not overly pessimistic. I'm just telling you the truth as it is. But the fact that I'm standing here today, the fact that I'm talking to you, is a sign of enormous hope. And that is the hope that I would like you to take back with you. Because there are still pockets of independent media, there are still voices which are talking, there are still writers writing, and there are still people fighting a good fight. And that is the hope that I'd like you to take back with you. The very fact that I edit Frontline, the very fact that Frontline is allowed to exist, the very fact that the Hindu group of publication does not put any pressure on me about what I can or cannot publish, regardless of the kind of advertising revenue I can or cannot bring in. Can you imagine what a luxury to be standing here and telling you this? It's a boon. They say that history needs to change before media changes, but it is my sense of optimism that makes me ask, can we perhaps change the way media functions in India and thereby force a change in history? I would like to think that we could do so, but the answer lies not with many of us who are on our way out, but with young people like you. On that provocative note, I will stop. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Vaishnav. It was so interesting, and particularly for people like me, was trying to learn about the topic that you have introduced us to. And what I liked the most was the way you handled it from the 7 ages as given by Shakespeare. So helping us also to learn Shakespeare through the history of media. That was a lovely thing that you have done. It was very informative, while at the same time you have also picked up on different moments, different significant events in the history which helped us to understand the contribution that women could make to the growth of media. So it was really wonderful having you here. You didn't sound pessimistic, but it was sad to listen to the 7th stage of the history of journalism. However, the way you have instigated the youngsters to take this and contribute to the change and create history, I think is the message that we would like to take back from this room. On behalf of everyone, I know Sharda will formally thank you, but I'm really happy that you were here this morning, the first time this couple of hours with us, and I hope you'll come back to interact very closely with the students of English and journalism, maybe in small groups on a one-to-one basis. I think we'll love to that. Now I request the Department of English to facilitate the presentation of memento to the speaker, after which we'll have Professor Sharda propose a vote of thanks. In a different
Thank you for that wonderful talk, Vaishnav. As a token of our gratitude for obliging our request, I request you to accept our felicitation, and I request Professor Uma to honor Vaishnav with a memento and Sridhar to come on to the dais. I request Uma Madam to honor the donor of this endowment lecture.
I'm here on behalf of the Department of English. I'm here to quickly propose vote of thanks. So it's my great privilege to be proposing vote of thanks on this special occasion. At the outset, I express my sincere thanks to Professor B. Uma Madam, former rector of this university, for having agreed, even at a very short notice, to preside over this function. Thank you, Madam, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I express my sincere thanks to Ms. Vaishno Roy for her presence and for her spellbounding lecture, and a very thought-provoking one. I'm sure the students have a lot of things to take from her lecture, and I'm sure that you are going to be the torchbearers for the future media. Okay. I also express my sincere thanks to Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, who has really contributed very generously to this endowment lecture, without which, listening to her academic profile, you could understand what a great scholar she is and how her generosity is reflected in the way she has contributed to this lecture. We are very thankful to you, Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, for your contribution. I am equally delighted to express my sincere thanks to the teachers of journalism department, former Vice Chancellor Professor Durga Bhavani Garu, IQAC Director Pitra Sundari, and also Shobha, and Dr. Kiran Prasad, the head of the Department of Communication and Journalism, who has made it possible to be with us today. Thank you so much for that. I am immensely thankful to colleagues from other departments, research scholars, students from the Department of Anthropology, Journalism, Media Management, Economics, Telugu, and so on. Sorry if I have forgotten anybody, it's not intentional. And I'll be paying my duty to express sincere thanks to Ms. Brinda Vasudevan, though Haripadma has mentioned it, but still in her absence, it's our duty to thank her for facilitating this program to come up with such a great personality in our presence. I thank her in her absence. It may be conveyed by Dr. Haripadma. We are also immensely thankful to the technical team here who have been continuously monitoring this smooth conduct of this program through their technical support, and also the staff of the Saveri Guest House. We profusely thank them for all the arrangements that they have made. And of course, I have a special, we have to give special thanks to our research scholars especially. I want all of you to give a big round of applause for them, because they are such an active lot that for any program that we do, they are there with us, and that support really gives us a lot of strength. So thank all the research scholars profusely for your contribution. And of course, without the presence of you students, such inspiring lot, and also the department, all the students from all the departments, we thank you all profusely for your patient presence, and also for the inspiring way you have remained silent and listening to it very keenly. Thank you one and all for your presence, and I thank my colleagues too for their presence. Okay, thank you one and all.